When my parents said that my Uncle Daniel was coming to stay with us for a while, I don't know how I felt about it. I come from a pretty wealthy family, and I'd say I have a pretty good life. I'm 15. My name's Desiree, by the way, and I have loads of great friends in my high school. The only major downfall is that my parents are super strict. As in, I need to study 8 hours a day, no boys are allowed in our house, and I'm not even allowed to have my best girlfriends over. So it gets pretty lonely at home. And now, to top it off, my weird uncle was staying with us, and that made me feel super uncomfortable. One weekend, I was studying in the garden by the pool. I was wearing a bikini because it was crazy hot. I suddenly had this feeling that I was being watched. Sure enough, when I turned around, there was my Uncle Daniel, standing by the window with a drink in his hand, smiling at me. Why was he so creepy? I quickly grabbed my towel and wrapped it around myself. When I came back into the house to get some water, he looked at me, licked his lips, and said, "Oh my, Desiree, you've grown up to be quite the stunner, haven't you?" Yuck! What was his problem? Later that day, I told my parents that he made me feel uncomfortable, and I told them what he'd said to me, and they just laughed and said he was just complimenting me, and that it was true. I was a pretty girl. And then, the next day, my parents left for a holiday to Spain. Yep, my Uncle Daniel was looking after me. It was like my worst nightmare came true. As soon as they left, he looked at me and winked and said, "It's just you and me, girl. What mischief are we going to get up to?" Later that night, I was hiding in my bedroom doing homework when I heard another man's voice in the house. My uncle had obviously invited a friend over. I turned my music down and crept to the top of the stairs to eavesdrop. They were laughing, and then I heard my name. Desiree would make us a pretty penny, that's for sure. Were they talking about selling me? Surely I misheard. I ran back to my room, my heart thumping in my chest. I was so hungry, but there was no way I was going downstairs now. I felt scared in my own home. This was ridiculous. I went to sleep and had a whole bunch of nightmares. I woke up at one point soaked in sweat and could have sworn there was a man in my room going through my cupboard. It looked like he was filling a bag with clothes. Were we being robbed? I felt delirious and realized it must have been a nightmare, so I closed my eyes and went back to sleep. But then I woke up the next day, and I wasn't in my room. I could barely see because the room I was in was dark. I looked down at myself and almost screamed. My hands were tied behind my back, and I was wearing red leather lingerie. There was no one else around, but suddenly I saw someone turn a light on outside the room I was in. The light filtered in, enough for me to figure out how to untie my hands. My bag of clothes the man had packed were by my feet, and I almost wanted to thank God. I kept a spare phone in the inside pocket, as that was my bag for school trips. My parents had bought it for me in case of emergencies, and this was definitely an emergency. I quickly reached for the bag and dialed 911. I used the GPS to track where I was and quickly told the operator, but suddenly, the door opened. I let the phone drop, but I didn't hang up. Uncle Daniel and his friend were standing there grinning, and I peered into the room behind them. There were dozens of girls tied up, and some of them even had their mouths taped shut. My uncle was rubbing his hands together, looking like he'd just won the lottery. I shut my eyes and pretended to be asleep and prayed that the police would turn up. My uncle's friend came over to me and said, "Wake up, smile for the camera. What do you think of your lingerie? I'm sure they will love it. You're gonna make us rich, sweetie." I was seriously ready to scream when I heard frantic footsteps above me. Suddenly, 3 cops were bashing open the door to this basement and running down. I cried with relief. My uncle and his friend were arrested and sentenced to 10 years in prison. I don't think that's enough for what they planned to do to me and all those other innocent young girls. One of the girls told us what they'd been planning: to sell us to an illegal establishment. They'd act as our pimps and take 50% of whatever we made. I don't understand how they could have thought they'd get away with this. Of course, me and my parents moved to a new house. I feel safer knowing he can't find us when he gets out. But I just wish my parents had taken me seriously when I told them he made me uncomfortable. I guess you never know what people's intentions are. But chances are, if you feel unsafe, it's because something isn't right. I hate to imagine what could have happened to us if the cops hadn't saved us in time.